So let's talk about how did you first end up moving to North Korea?
So I'm from a country that is, relatively speaking, very, very neutral in international affairs. And my grandfather was a diplomat from that country to North Korea. And I was 15 at the time that he was appointed to go there. And honestly, I didn't have a say in it. It was a decision made between him and my parents. And yeah, so had to go join him there, almost against my will in a way.
What's that like as a 15-year-old?
Well, obviously a very big culture shock, and the fact that I didn't have a say in it, obviously kids, get moved around a lot because of their family or their parents or whatever. But yeah, I mean, uh, a lot of things I knew I was gonna miss from the quote unquote the first world, but I really had no way of knowing exactly what it was gonna be like, right? So it was just kind of like a take it as it comes kind of thing once I got there. Tried to be optimistic about it, but I ended up getting a bit depressed. But I mean, can you blame me? It's North Korea, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your first impressions and how that compared to the social media sort of descriptions of it.
Well, my very first impression, once I got there was all the big old propaganda pieces, right? And the country I'm from used to be communist a long time ago, before I was born. Um, so, I have seen some of the remnant pieces, the like stuff that's still left over from those days. And just there was like a kind of like seeing a shadow of it there in North Korea too, right? Or maybe it's the other way around, shadow of it in my home country. So it was familiar yet alienating just because of the amount of propaganda pieces there were, like those huge like paintings, murals, and like slogans written in big bold letters, right? Well, big bold Korean letters. Didn't understand that at first, but I done. But anyways, the social media, I mean, pretty much at first it looked just like what I expected it to look like, from um, from like what you would see on the news. But that's Pyongyang, right? Like later on, once I was able to see outside Pyongyang, it really looked just like a very arid plains, I guess. Kind of it would be it was very dry outside the cities, and barren fields, and know, like obviously malnourished people, right? Uh, yeah. Sorry, it's a bit of a general answer. Hope that's all right.
Don't worry about general answers. Honestly, you're doing absolutely fine. It's just great to hear from a perspective that's been there and understands it obviously better than anyone. So you know, can I ask about the attitude of the local people towards outsiders?
Right. Okay. So I wasn't allowed to, interact with like anyone and everyone, right? I mean, I guess I wasn't ever like forbidden from it. No one ever told us we couldn't, but obviously we knew better, and the locals knew better too. So the only people I could, freely interact with were like shop staff or restaurant staff or like my tutors and people like that who would have a good reason to interact with us, right? I'm sure they probably went through their own vetting process with the government or the party or whoever to be put in those positions. And generally speaking, they were friendly enough. Obviously, they have decent relationships with the countries that would be sending people there, right? So they never treated us as any as like enemies or anything like that. But I did have to hide the fact that I lived in the U.S. Prior to going there, and also I toned down my English just a little bit to not make it too obvious that I was speaking American English, right? I mean, that was just at the request of my relative. I didn't know if that was something that would have ever been relevant or not, but I just listened and obeyed, right? But yeah, I mean, people are people. anywhere, right? So they all had their own daily worries and their own curiosities, but about the outside world, so to speak. And every once in a while they would say or ask some things about like the outside, and we give an answer, and they wouldn't really react any way or the other, kind of just like they got their curiosities sated, and they just move on, right? They're not like mind blown by whatever I tell them, and I'm sure with the level of propaganda they receive about the outside world, they were probably like if I told them, oh yeah, South Korea is way more advanced than the North, like which I have in a few times, they wouldn't like react negatively, but they also wouldn't react positively either. They'd just be like, oh, is that right? And just kind of move on. Yeah, but general attitudes of the population, like later on, once I learned Korean, I could kind of like make out what people were saying on the streets, like in Pyongyang, they were not that, it wasn't that bad. A lot of people seemed decently satisfied with their lot in life. But once you left Pyongyang, that's when you could definitely tell people weren't having a great time.
What's the difference on the outside?
Outside of Pyongyang and inside.
Yeah.
Well, Pyongyang is where all the the quote unquote the central government functions are, right? So a lot of people that work for the party live there, and yeah, it's kind of like their quote unquote the flagship, right? What they want the world to see, right? And it's decent. Like for example, when I compare the living conditions in the capital city of where I'm from versus Pyongyang, it almost seems like people in Pyongyang might have a slightly better quality of life, right? So, but as soon as you leave Pyongyang, it's just like a night and day difference. It's just like instantly rural, like what are supposed to be like agricultural, farmer communities, right? They just end up being, uh, well, you know, kind of desolate, so to speak, right? And of course, people in Pyongyang, they have, generally speaking, access to electricity, access to, like heat in the winter, right? Heating, I should say. And, just like a very big difference in the quality of life is the easiest way to sum that up.
What are the restaurants like in North Korea?
So, well, they operate like how a normal restaurant would, exchange money for food. But that's only for us foreigners, right? Like we were only allowed to go to certain restaurants, so we could just like walk into like any random restaurant, and but we would have these so-called diplomatic clubs and like other like establishments that we were allowed to go to. They were decent enough. They had foreign food, they had Korean food. Ingredients were okay. It wasn't anything stellar, but wasn't bad either. So yeah.
So, and you could only associate with North Koreans that were authorized to socialize with. Can you say a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So again, like people who would work at stores that we could visit, or at restaurants we could eat at, or like the people at the foreigner school, right? Teachers. Obviously they'd have to interact with us to teach. And then we didn't have North Korean staff, but like some embassies kept North Korean, local staff, right? Obviously they would be allowed to interact with foreigners, and some of the guards at the gates. No, nothing like no like deep interaction, but like surface level, hello, hi, how are you, kind of stuff here and there. But the people I interacted with the most were my tutors, because we were in a better environment, a more private environment, I would say. Yeah, and that's who I really got to know the best, I guess, out of the North Koreans. And obviously, they would have to have some kind of authorization to be put in that position, right? That you couldn't just pick a random North Korean off the street and be like, "Hey, would you tutor a foreigner?" Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, a few years ago, there was a film that came out called The Interview that got in quite a lot of trouble for its depiction over North Korea.
Uh-huh.
Now, is there any accuracy to the way, I know it's a comedy, but to the way that was depicted as opposed to what life is actually like there?
Well, I'll hit honeypotting as the first point. Like using an attractive person of the other gender to try to, entrap people into doing a certain thing or coerce people into doing some things. There were rumors from like the embassy staff about how they would, like purposefully try to honeypot some people. Like obviously not people like us, but like important people. Sometimes in North Korea, sometimes abroad even. But I don't know. I mean, it could have just been rumors. I've obviously never dealt with it firsthand. I asked my relative, my grandfather, about it, and he himself also said he's never experienced that firsthand, or if he did, he didn't notice it. I made a joke about how he might have missed out on it or something, right? Much to the dismay of my grandmother. But that I mean, I could see that as a real thing that does happen because Russians honeypot people, right? Like there was that one story about that one Ukrainian lieutenant or something that ended up getting honeypotted and whatever, like a few years ago, and then these but anyways, next, like the fat kid, that's something that really stands out. I have not seen a single fat child when I was there, I guess. What else? Let's see. Oh, about them saying the great leader does not defecate. I'm not sure if that's something that people wholeheartedly believed in, but yeah, they do come up with some really ridiculous, things to credit to the leaders. I'm sure if you do a search for it, like, about how Il like invented basketball, or like Kim Il Sung used to ride Pegasus or like a unicorn into battle against the Japanese or whatever, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if that was like a legitimate piece of propaganda that they put out.
There was saying about that. There was a piece about, is it Kim-Jong Il talking about how he played a certain amount of rounds of golf, never missed a hole.
Oh yeah, stuff like that, and like those a good amount of the population do believe it, right? And some, if they don't, they at least don't make it public that they don't believe it, right? Because that's just the status quo. They don't really go against it, I suppose. They know better, right? Um, and I was also gonna comment on the store having like fake fruit, or if you remember that. I personally didn't see any fake merchandise at any of the stores we were allowed to go to. But the stores that they brought the tourists to and the stores that we actually went and bought stuff from were separate stores. So perhaps there could have been some fake merchandise at the tourist spots, but from what I heard of from like embassy staff and other people who've been to those tourist shops, that was a straight up lie. They don't have like fake merchandise now. However, they will stack up like the stuff they have, their inventory, and make like massive displays out of them, while like a lot of people uh, aren't allowed to actually purchase them because you would need special permission to be there in the first place, right? So I guess in a way, having merchandise that's displayed in a grandiose fashion without people being allowed to buy it, I suppose that could be classified as fake merchandise. It just wasn't as overt as the movie implied, like with what was it? It was like grapefruit or like an orange made of like concrete or something like that, right? Nothing like obviously stupid like that. Yeah.
Was you in North Korea when that film came out?
Oh no. That movie I believe came out, I think
2012.
really? Huh.
I might get that well off.
Okay. Well, still either way,
Yeah.
after I left, I actually went there and had my 2 years and a half there and left while Kim Jong Un's father, was still alive. He passed
Oh wow.
shortly after I left, actually. So I don't know much about the Kim Jong Un days. And on top of that, yeah, that movie came out like at least a few years after I left. So no, I
Yeah,
wasn't
I'm
there.
just always curious about being on the ground when a situation like that happens, because obviously there was, when that, before it had even been released,
Mhm.
there was talks of inciting, violence and all other kinds of things.
It was shortly before I got there, I believe. It was around 2007 or 2008. Kim Jong-Il had his first stroke, if I remember correctly. It was actually from that point forward that they started to arrange for Kim Jong Un to take power. So a lot of that speculation about the infighting was honestly just on the outside. Like the North Korean elite and people who were communicating with diplomats already knew, and and I know this because my grandfather knew well ahead of hand who was going to be the next leader before Kim Jong Il passed. Right? He would just casually mention it every once in a while, and I would just be like, okay, and he'll say, yeah, it's not going to be the first son, it's going to be Kim Jong Un. You just watch and see. And I was like, okay, and sure enough, it did happen. So they had that planned from years and years ahead because they knew Kim Jong Il's health was declining.
What made them go with or not go with the first son?
Well, Kim Jong Nam, he was quote unquote a dumbass. And if you just look at, for example, there was the time when he tried to illegally enter Japan so he could visit Disneyland in Tokyo. And there's just a lot of incidents of him doing very unintelligent things. And again, of course, I call him a dumbass. I mean, man might have been smarter than me, but yeah, he was just not a person who was capable of handling power and authority. And I say that, knowing that Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un and their grandfather Kim Il-sung, they, all didn't really handle the power right, but at least they're not overtly dumb with it, trying to illegally enter their enemy nation just to go to an amusement park, Yeah. So, and on top of that, Kim Il-sung, sorry, not Kim Il-sung, sorry, Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-nam, the first son, they were known to be, it was pretty well known that they weren't really on good footing with each other anyway. So, yeah, that's probably why they went with Kim Jong-un.
I just become very aware of the fact that you called him a dumbass, and it's my face that's on the screen. Can you talk about did you come across much propaganda and brainwashing while you were out there?
Well, yeah, they had those huge propaganda pieces all over the place, right? The slogans saying undefeated, right? Or we're the last holdout of communism in the world and stuff nothing to envy outside of North Korea and so on and so forth. And then so yeah, there was a lot of propaganda, and obviously there's a whole lot of brainwashing. Whenever the leaders would make an appearance somewhere, there would be crowds of people just falling to their knees, crying because it's they've gotten to see their god, basically, right? Just to give you an idea, if you look up Kim Jong-il's funeral procession, it's the middle of winter. There's snow and ice on the road. It's actually snowing, and the people who are watching the funeral procession go by, they were throwing their own coats again in the middle of winter on the road in front of the funeral wagon so that it wouldn't get stuck in the ice. At least is how they were interpreting it. They were just throwing their own, literally the clothes off their own back in front of the car that held the body of Kim Jong-il, right? So there was a lot of fanaticism and brainwashing. Now, as for me firsthand, having gone to the foreigners school there, aside from the regular subjects, they would have little pieces of quote unquote history thrown in there, right? Usually stuff to do with how Kim Il-sung led the Korean Peninsula out of Japanese tyranny and stuff like that, which I mean, he is credited with that, rightfully so. But there's there was a whole lot of other stuff that I just honestly didn't pay much attention to because I knew it was all BS, right? And yeah, that's about it for first-hand brainwashing, I guess.
Can you talk about the diplomatic immunity that you had?
Yeah. So diplomatic immunity obviously isn't just for me or just for diplomats. Anyone who works for a diplomatic mission is supposed to have diplomatic immunity from the government that they are, I guess, carrying out foreign relations with. So as an extension of my grandfather's immunity, with myself being his family member, and being there with him and living at the embassy, I also had it. So they couldn't just kidnap me, so to speak, right? And pretty much every embassy worker had it from every other embassy as well, not just ours. And that's not just like something you get in North Korea, like for example, diplomats from the UK and the US would have that, right? You would have diplomats from Russia to the US would have it too. That's why you don't see like, CIA agents just like kidnapping Russian diplomats, right? Like, if they were suspected of espionage, they would just at worst get deported. Yeah.
And you developed an eating disorder there because you couldn't stomach the thought of eating like food while so many people were starving. Can you speak about that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, it's honestly, it's misallocated guilt, is what my therapist called it. It's not something I had any kind of control over, right? Just because I wasn't eating doesn't mean, these starving masses were going to get fed. But yeah, just something I didn't really think about until I was kind of face to face with it, I guess, right? Like, just the privilege of having 3 meals a day. I mean, even my home country has a problem with hunger, which I wasn't really keenly aware of until I was there, right? In North Korea, I mean. But yes, I had a very hard time stomaching food. I would force myself to eat just because my grandparents were worried, but I would throw it up again. Yeah, I just had a pretty hard time with that. I don't know what else I can say.
Is it something you still struggle with?
Well, no, it's been years now, and I'm a lot better. I mean, I believe it's been 12 years or more since I left. But I was underweight for quite some time, and ironically now I'm a little bit overweight. So I guess you could say I've gotten over it.
It is quite common if you're used to not, I don't know, in regards to eating disorders, but especially if you're in a poorer condition or you're under eating, that when you get that opportunity to kind of overcorrect.
Well, that probably applies to people who, like just didn't have the physical availability of food. Like I had food available, like it was there.
Yeah.
It's just I emotionally, I guess, just couldn't eat without feeling bad about it for some reason, right? It's completely logical, and I see that now. But as a teenager at the time who was already kind of depressed, it was probably just, taken way out of proportion. I mean, or not way out of proportion, but somehow allocated the guilt onto myself, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. I'm sorry, English isn't my first language.
No, you're doing great. Thank you. And you were shocked to discover that there was a crystal meth problem there.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I never expected North Korea to have a drug problem, but then again, I was a naive teenager. But like pretty much everyone I tell this to is also surprised because they're like, oh, they're an authoritarian state. Wouldn't they be like really like, heavily policing illegal substances? But no, they didn't. It was just pretty rampant. I knew, quite a few people I could have easily bought it from, if I was into that. But, even at that age, I knew that crystal meth was definitely not something I should mess around with. Now, there was this other medicine called amidol, which is basically like methadone, right? It's used to treat opioid disorders, right? There was a lot of heroin addicts out there as well. In fact, my tutor said that he had family members who were, or one of my tutors anyway, said that he had family members who were addicted to heroin, and that the amidol was meant to be something that would take over for heroin, just like methadone, right? And I used to just buy it from hospital staff because I would go in for a checkup and I would just, they wanted euros and they probably had a stock or inventory that they always kept on hand. And yeah, Yeah.
Would this be supplied by the state just to sort of keep everyone a little bit like?
Um, so I don't think it was supplied by the state, but like the common understanding was that they didn't really crack down on it because hey, if they're happy and they're like um docile, like not docile, but if they're kept in check and if it requires a little bit of chemical help for some of the population, they probably just wanted to let sleeping dogs lie in that specific scenario anyway.
What were the main leisure activities that you got up to while you were out there?
Me personally, or like the population?
Both.
Okay, well, I'll start with the population. It, in most Soviet style communist countries, a lot of workforces used to get like like state mandated outings, right? So they would get like little picnics to the lake, or with your coworkers and then their families, or like little outings to like karaoke style places, right? Or even an amusement park, right? So it's weird to say, but a friend of mine called it state mandated fun, right? But I feel like that actually describes it really well. And my relatives who grew up during the communist days back, when my home country was also communist, they said they used to have those exact same outings. They would be given a certain day by the state saying, hey, it's your turn to go to that one lake and have like a day off, right? And whenever we would go and do stuff, we would always see those groups of people just having fun there, and there was a lot of drinking, like mostly the men, right? But like they could handle their liquor. They would drink and drink and drink, like yeah. So I would say that was a pretty big, I guess, a hobby or pastime for them, drinking, right? Whenever it was not going to get in the way of their work. As for myself personally, we would go to these places called the diplomatic clubs. Um, they had karaoke, a dance floor or two, a bar or two. Now, it should be noted I was a teenager, way underage, but they served us. They didn't care. um, yeah, and then hanging out with other foreign teenagers. We would go explore the city, riding our bicycles or by foot or even taking their subways. And later on, once I learned how to drive, even just, driving around for no reason, right? At weird times of the night sometimes. Looking back on it, we were very, very nonchalant about it, I guess. I can definitely see it playing out a completely different way had we not had the immunity we had, right? And video games, reading, stuff you could do indoors. That, and then I also
Yeah.
mentioned the Amidol problem I used to have, so that too.
What's your? I want to get into that, but what's your? So I have to ask because you mentioned it. What's your North Korean karaoke song of choice?
Oh no, I would sing foreign songs. I don't. Hold on. I think there might have been a couple. There was this one about leaving home and like how you're gonna go serve the country and make your mother proud or something like, and but then like you're missing home while you're doing that or whatever. It was a song that was apparently, I mean, I learned about it later on, that was popular among the conscripts, right? North Korean conscripts, because they would be conscripted and leave home. But yeah, that was, I think, maybe the only song I knew. I can't remember the name though. I could try to look it up if you hold on a second.
No, you're right. What's your favorite foreign song to sing?
Back then, I really liked Green Day. So, stuff like Holiday. They loved American Idiot just because of the title.
Yeah, respect. Trying to work out what mine would be. Bit of Tim McGraw, maybe. Does the what did you call it? Amadon.
Yeah.
So what is that?
So it is. So hold on.
No, you're right.
So it's okay. From what I understood about it, it's kind of like methadone, right? Used to treat opioid addiction, but itself, kind of gave you a high similar to, especially if you take it in large quantities, right? Like we used to. So, kind of like a really strong painkiller that you can take and just zone out for hours on.
Yeah. What are your final thoughts looking back at your time in North Korea?
Well, I personally wish I had never gone, but obviously can't turn back the clock on that, right? Yeah, because I did develop a drug habit elsewhere too. Could be because of my outlook on drugs was probably a bit altered because I already had a problem at one point, and I was like, whatever, like can't be too bad or whatever. So I would say, had I not gone to North Korea, I probably could have avoided having those other drug problems, I would say. And also, probably be in a better mental state overall because for years and years, I couldn't be, I would remember North Korea and I would like get like, like panic fits. Like the most recent one was about 2, maybe 3 years ago. I was just at the grocery store here in the US and I just heard some Korean people talking and I just had this weird flashback kind of thing. I just kind of started, like heavy breathing. I not really reacting to what's going on, just kind of like sat down on the floor and just wouldn't react to, my wife trying to like shake me out of it and stuff like that. I believe I wouldn't have had to deal with. So overall, wish I'd never gone, I guess.
Absolutely. I suppose it's harder being there and then so when you're affected by something, it's only when you're really out of the line of fire that you really reflect back, right?
Yeah. And to a lesser extent, I was also very paranoid, especially the first few years after I left. Because living in countries like in South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. right after being in what's considered an enemy state, right? Like I was worried that I might have been under surveillance from either one of those three countries uh, or North Korea itself. It's been over a decade, and I still find it hard to show my face when I'm talking about it, right? So, or maybe it does affect me more than I think. Who knows? That too, I guess.
Absolutely.